All right. Welcome to Naomi Wright Ministries, our November live stream. Can righteous anger justify abusive behavior? With Dr. Michael Ballard. My name is Natasha Fish, and I'm the Board of Directors Chair for NW Ministries. And I'm absolutely thrilled to produce and host today's live stream. We'll be listening to the content that Naomi and Dr. Ballard recorded for us before diving into the live Q&A with Dr. Ballard. And you can find this and more incredible episodes on our podcast, Reclamation, an NWM initiative. Listen anywhere you find your podcast or by clicking on the link in the chat that I'm going to put right there right now. If you want more, you may be wondering why it's just me on the screen today. I'm really sad to share that Naomi is actually under the weather and won't be joining us for the Q&A as founder and executive director for NW Ministries. And if you know her personally, you know it takes a lot to pull her away from what she loves best, which is getting to share about this work and a chance to connect with you all. So we'll be missing her wonderful presence with us, though I'm glad you'll get to hear her excellent pre-recorded conversation with Dr. Ballard. The reason we are tackling this topic today is because we're calling it for what it is. Adding righteous before anger is too often an excuse for what is actually abusive, unchristlike, and completely unacceptable behavior. We want this conversation to bring clarity to this reality and to help you create firm, solid boundaries around what is permissible and what is not. We'll have Dr. Michael Ballard with us after the pre-recorded content to answer your questions. So start adding them to the chat now and at any point during our live stream so he can be ready to answer those. I'm excited for you to get to hear firsthand from him as an expert in this matter, which he is. Dr. Michael Ballard is a certified anger management specialist, as well as author of Take Control of Your Anger, a step-by-step guide to anger management. He's also a teacher and licensed psychologist, having earned a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Denver, as well as completed his undergraduate work at Georgetown University and a master's in counseling from Denver Seminary. He's also just a delightful person to engage with. After listening to this episode and meeting him in person once, I already feel like I can just sit down and grab a cup of coffee with him. So he's excellent at what he does, and it is a true treat to have him speaking today. This episode in particular hit home for me, so we hope and we pray it's an encouragement and a beneficial discussion for you as well. With that, I am pleased to present Naomi and Dr. Ballard's discussion on righteous anger.
Story time. My dad was a volatile man. No one knew what would set him off or when he would lose it, so we were all constantly on alert and on guard when he was around. I was taught that his anger was a reflection of God. It was God's spirit within him, responding to the evil in the world, and therefore his temper was justified. It was righteous. It was good. As an adult, I've had similar experiences with anger. Someone on a work call in a meeting started yelling at me, filling the virtual screen with his body as he rocked in and out toward the camera in an intimidating manner, all the while shredding my character. He allowed no room for a misunderstanding or grace for wrongdoing, if these even applied at all. After running out of steam and starting to calm, he said that his angry outburst and attack was righteous and that he was proud of himself for having learned to let it out rather than to keep it in. He wasn't the only one on that call, and everyone else sat by and watched. So what's the deal? Were these men justified? Was God glorified by their behavior? Today, we welcome Dr. Michael Ballard, author of Take Control of Your Anger, a step-by-step guide to anger management, as well as a teacher and licensed psychologist, to discuss forms of anger, including righteous anger, and hopes of bringing light to what can be a very dark, confusing, and incredibly harmful area. So Dr. Ballard, I know that anger has played an important role in your career and the direction you've taken and what your specialty is and all of that. So would you mind giving us a little more background on what that role has looked like?
Sure. I have spent a lot of my career working with anger and doing anger management and anger treatment. Didn't really intend for it to be that way when I got started, I just found a lot of patients who had anger problems sort of resonated and somehow ended up in my office. I think a lot of people have asked me, personally, did I have an anger problem? Is that why I got into it? That's not my story. I will say I've had family members who that is a story. So I get it on a personal level. And I think when I started meeting with people, it just clicked. And the other side of it is that some clinicians don't really like working with angry patients because they get mad at you and yell at you and leave mean voicemail messages and things like that.
Right.
But I don't mind them. I like working with people who have anger problems. And so early on in my career, a lot of people would funnel and send people my way that there were sort of the troubles on their caseload. They didn't like them. And I thought it was great. And so I had sort of a unique caseload of, misfits that other people didn't want, but it worked out great for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind giving me a few examples of different contexts in which you've worked with people who have anger struggles?
Sure. I started out working with teens in a residential facility that were in the juvenile justice system. So it was a lot of gang-related behaviors, fights, assaults, very violent crimes, and really liked them. Just connected with them. Again, that was not who I was as a teenager, but just really liked them. Then I went into day treatment and school settings for adolescents, then started doing more outpatient. And then I worked more with adults, and I found that adult anger is actually very similar to teenage anger. Kind of surprised me. Adults hide it better, and they have better coping skills. So a lot of times teens, when they're angry at school and they're angry at home and they're angry at the neighborhood, a lot of adults will be great at the workplace and great in front of some groups, great at church, where they'll say, nobody would ever believe that I have anger problems, but then they'll come home and have extreme anger in different situations. So you see that a lot.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And today, within the context of what NWN does and what our mission is, the different types of people that we're working with and the struggles they run into, we oftentimes see anger being used as a justification. Or let me rephrase that. The Bible, in some ways, is a justification for anger. So anger is righteous. As an example, it's something I run into often. So it's used as an excuse for behavior that harms other people. So that's our topic today. As you know, I'm excited to get into this a bit more. And I'm curious, though, to start. Again, that's how our audience that will be listening to us, that's how they hear anger used. What other justifications have you heard? Have you run into this, either what I just said or other uses?
Oh, sure. There's a lot of people who will say things like, I'm angry because I grew up in a family where everybody was angry and that's all there is to it. Or even, heritage things. I'm Italian or I'm Irish or I'm whatever, I can't help it. I've heard people say, I'm from the East Coast. It's just different there. People are angry. But it's sort of this justification of, since there's this part of who I am or my story, that's just it. I'm going to be an angry person and deal with it. That's kind of all there is to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've definitely heard people use their heritage as well. So not in a religious context, but just in general. I remember hearing comments like that at school or something like that. Or, yeah, I'm Irish or I'm Italian, and so I get loud. And
right. Yeah. People don't understand. That's just my family. And you go, oh, well, okay. But just, because you have an Italian heritage doesn't mean that you can punch holes in your walls, and we all have to just kind of go, well, he's Italian, there's nothing we can do about it. That doesn't work really well. Right,
absolutely. So again, within this context of NWM and religious experiences, from unhealthy experiences to something that would be classified as abusive, and all the way to a, just by definition, cult experience, we're hearing these two justifications that I mentioned: righteous anger, or that someone has the spirit of Elijah. That's one that I've heard many times too. And that is intended to mean that the person's temper is divinely appointed. First, what is your response to this use of righteous anger?
It's a great topic, and I could talk for hours and hours about it. I do think there is an element where anger is not always bad. I think there are times and places where anger is an appropriate emotion and it's a justified emotion. And if we look biblically, Jesus did get angry. And so we're foolish to say that all anger always is wrong in every way, shape, and form as a categorical statement. The big difference is righteous anger. It's about who it's directed towards or what it's about. So when you look at Jesus, he was slighted over and over and over. People insulted him. People mocked him, spit him. Obviously crucified him. He didn't get angry about those things. It was never, I'm angry because somebody's wronging me. He was angry for a couple other reasons. Are people getting in the way of people seeking God? Are people making it more difficult? Are you being a hypocrite? Are you standing up and making religious rules that are making it more difficult for people? Are you, getting in the temple, making it more difficult, making it more expensive for people to come to the temple and do their sacrifices? It's this presence of, am I mad about myself or am I mad about something that is deeper for God? If somebody was angry about injustice in the world, if somebody's angry about human traffic, if they're angry about poverty, about oppression, about racism, there's part of me that says, yes, that's appropriate to experience anger because that's not right. And the basis of anger is that there's a perception that there's an injustice that's been done. And so I believe that something wrong has happened. Well, in those situations, something wrong really has happened. It's not okay to steal people from their home and human traffic. It's not. And so anger is an appropriate response. If I'm angry because I'm driving down the road and I get a red light or a car goes in front of me, or because my kids are taking too long to get their backpack ready for school, that's not a big moral problem in the world. That's my own personal inconvenience. That's something that's getting in my way of doing the way things that I want to live in sort of my own personal kingdom. And that's the big distinction. Most of the time when I talk to people about anger, they're not angry about worldwide injustices. Very rarely is that what's coming into my office. They're angry because they didn't get what they want, because somebody did something to make their life more difficult.
So let's say, for example, that someone believes that their wife, so let's say there's a man and he believes that his wife is supposed to have the dinner on the table at 5. And he believes, based on scripture, that it is the woman's role to submit to his belief that this should be the case. Now, I know we already have 10 problems, but let's just imagine that there aren't problems so far.
Sure.
If that's the case and it doesn't happen, dinner isn't ready till 5:15, and he's upset and he claims righteous anger, even if they believe that righteous anger is indeed an appropriate label on that scenario, what action should come from that righteous anger?
Right. And that's a great question, because if I pretend for a second, yes, that's completely righteous in every way, shape, and form, which I obviously don't believe. But if I did, your action, you're still accountable. So, it's not hard. You look at, in your anger, do not sin, right? And so can you be angry? Yes. Should you sin with your anger? No. So if somebody does something to make you angry, or you become angry because of this action, that doesn't give you the right to then explode. Even if it's righteous. If someone slashes my tires in the parking lot, that's wrong. And I would be correct in being angry about having my tires slashed. If I go burn their house down, I can't say, well, they slashed my tires, so it's righteous anger. They did the first thing wrong, so I'm allowed to. No, that's obviously ridiculous. But you take that to the same example. If a wife doesn't have a dinner on the table at 5:00, and then I yell and scream and make a scene and, berate her and take the dishes and throw them around the kitchen. I can't then just say, well, this is righteous anger because she's wrong. I'm still responsible for my actions. And there's no way that would be an appropriate response to act out in that way, especially for that, quote unquote crime. It doesn't fit at all.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the real catch comes in, because this application of righteous anger, that's a separate conversation. Like the example I gave you, there are people who really believe that. So we really would have to start there first. But for people who say are stuck there and know these are my beliefs, this is what I think is true, we still have this second issue of, well, the way you're then acting out your quote unquote righteous anger, is that in alignment with what scripture tells us? Is that turning the other cheek? Is that forgiving 70 times 7, which is indefinitely, we're supposed to continue to forgive. And of course, that doesn't mean we don't remove ourselves from an unhealthy situation, but we are called to seek forgiveness. And that's the real catch where I see this being so problematic, is that people use their quote unquote righteous anger as an excuse and a justification for whatever behavior they feel in the moment. And so, Dr. Ballard, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to share with everyone a brief overview of what happens in the brain when someone really loses it. So if someone hits the point of, like I said, this idea of righteous anger, what's going on with their ability to really make choices about how they're going to behave?
Oh, yeah, this is great. I could nerd out on this for a while. So the basic way to look at it is we have the prefrontal cortex in our brain, which is the center of logic and reasoning and long-term planning and decision-making and sort of our, wisdom that we really make our best decisions. And most of what we do as adults is try to use our prefrontal cortex to think through and say, if I do this, it will lead to that. A is going to lead to B, B is going to lead to C, C is going to lead to D. And so I'm going to make these choices and I'm going to think through them logically. We also have a different section of our brain, which is more of the midbrain. There's a few different functions there that's more based on our just primal urges. And these are the urges for hunger. These are the urges for sex. These are the urges for rage. And they can be used, and they are important in different times of our lives. The challenge is there's a connection, there's a pathway between the two of them. And what often happens is the midbrain gets the signal first of, I'm hungry. And then the prefrontal cortex says, okay, what should I eat? Let's think about this. Let's make our decisions. Let's weigh our pros and cons. I don't have a lot of money in my budget, so I should eat at home. That kind of thing. And it kind of goes back and forth between the two. When we're angry, what happens is what's called transient hypofrontality. There's a pathway between the midbrain and the prefrontal cortex, like a road that basically gets washed out. And so the communication and the context between the midbrain and the prefrontal cortex is essentially gone. And we're now living in this prefrontal cortex is not able to be accessed. We can't get to it. And so some authors have dubbed this like our caveman brain, that we basically were angry and we're just responding to our primal urges. We just say, hungry, angry, this is what I want. I just want this now. And we're not able to think through, because what doesn't happen is I'm angry and I say, I'm angry. What should I, maybe the best answer would be to punch a hole in this wall. Well, let me think about the pros and cons of punching a hole. If I punch in the hole in this wall, I might hurt my hand. I'll damage the wall. I'll have to repair it later. It might scare people around me, but I do have this tension. And so it might feel good to come out. Should I do it? Should I not do it? Like that conversation doesn't happen. What just happens is I have this urge and this power and I do it. And then later that road reconnects. And that's when I go, oh no, why did I do this thing? This doesn't make any sense. Because basically part of my brain, it was not being accessed at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. So it basically like short circuits you, is how I would, I guess, summarize it. It's like that part just goes, it's gone. And so if I'm in a situation where My significant other doesn't have dinner on the table at 5. I'm really angry about that. I feel like my anger is righteous.
Yes.
Really, in that moment, I probably don't feel anything about my classification of anger. I just feel angry.
Yes.
So it would be later, because I don't have the capability to even think, well, this is righteous anger because of this reason, so I'm now going to behave in this way. I'm just mad.
Right. And if you think about somebody who is angry, they kind of do act like a caveman. Like they'll grunt, they'll pound things, they'll speak in short sentences, they'll, yell. That's sort of what they do. And so you're not going to be logical at that point. You're not going to be mad and then say, is this righteous anger or is it not? In the moment, you just feel the anger. And actually, if I were to ask you in that moment, is this anger righteous? Almost always you'd be like, absolutely. Of course it is. Because you've lost your prefrontal cortex. And so it feels righteous. It feels correct in your body, even though it's not.
Right. And then after, the excuse would be made, that was righteous because my desire is to cover up for poor behavior.
I have to explain it some way. Why would I do these violent acts? Why would I take things and throw them all over the room? And I work with wonderful people who are kind and loving, who have done horrific things. And then they sit there and they go, I don't understand. Why would I hurt my child? I love my child. Why would this ever happen? And then you justify, well, it's because it was righteous anger, because I told my child to clean his room and he didn't clean his room. And as his parent, I need to be the authority. And since he didn't clean his room, and you go, well, hold on. I'm not saying your child shouldn't clean his room, but you're justifying your actions because you exploded in a way that was really inappropriate, and you're trying to find a way to make sense of that.
And so again, if we hypothetically say someone's righteous anger or someone's anger is actually righteous. So if we're going to use the example you gave about social justice,
yes,
we are upset genuinely about something that's going on in a country with a specific group of people, whatever that looks like. We're upset about that. And it makes sense that we're upset about that we're fired up about that. What does our action look like? What are some options based on what we have in the New Testament about Jesus's model to actually go by?
Yeah, I think the piece there is you look at what's productive. What can we do that will move things forward and make things better instead of worse? So if I find out that a teacher at school slapped my child in school, okay, that's not okay. That's not okay. I'm not going to justify that. I'm not going to be okay with it. But, if I go to that teacher's school and slash her tires, that's not productive. I haven't helped anything. I've made the problem worse, which is what anger often does, is it escalates. By nature, I call you a name, you call me a worse name. Then I push you, then you push me. Then I punch you, then you punch me. And that's the nature of anger, is it gets bigger. It doesn't stay normal. And so if that's going to happen, if a teacher hurts my child, the first thing I have to do is calm down, because it's that same piece. My initial reaction is to lash out. Even if it's over email, I'm going to write a really mean, angry email. Well, I probably shouldn't hit send right away. Because I bet if I waited an hour and I looked back, I'd go, ooh, that's not a great email. I don't like the way I said that. Texting, couples get in trouble with texting all the time. They're mad, and so they write something really fast, and then it just escalates and escalates. So there is the sense of slow down, don't do that first response. But you do need to respond. You do need to do something. What I'm not going to say is just turn the other cheek when there is an injustice that's done in the world. I think that's wrong. I think when we see things that are wrong, we do need to act. And so in this situation, I'm going to schedule a meeting with the teacher. I'm going to go Matthew 18. I'm going to go straight to that teacher. Let's have a conversation. Hey, this is what was reported to me, and we're going to talk about it. If that doesn't work, we're going to bring in another person. Eventually, do we need to go to a principal? Sure. But I'm going to go, first of all, and have that conversation. But I'm not going to have that conversation until I'm calm and I'm collected. I'm not going to show up at the school right away with fire, just ready to explode. That's not going to help. It's not going to move things forward. I'm going to collect my thoughts, make sure I'm calm. And then the problem is then people will calm down and they say, well, I don't want to make a mess. Let's just forget it. And I go, no. Like, if there was a problem, we need to act. We just need to act in a calm way that makes things better and not worse.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I can imagine right now that someone listening to this might think, well, it does make it better because this person now does what I say. And in reality, they may, because they're scared.
Right.
So what really constitutes better?
It's a great question, because fear can be a great motivator if we're talking about, a parent to a child, if we're talking about a spouse, if we're talking about a boss to an employee, if we're talking about, I'm going to go talk to this teacher and scare this teacher, and then this teacher's never messing with my kid again. If we say that works, okay, but it's not a great motivator. It's not, because now I'm not actually acting out of what I feel is my own choice and volition. I'm acting out of fear, which oftentimes leads to manipulation, leads to sneakiness. You clean your room or I'll hit you. Well, the kid may clean their room, or they may just throw stuff under the bed or in the closet or in a different place because they're afraid to get hit, but they're not actually doing what needs to be done. And they're certainly not doing it for the right motivation. It's a fear base of, oh, my boss is going to be mad at me. And so what do I do? Well, when my boss isn't there, then I act crazy and I can slack off today. Well, hold on, that's not right. I shouldn't be doing the right thing out of fear. If I'm doing the right thing out of fear, I'm missing the point. I should be doing the right thing because it's the right thing. And if I'm a boss or a husband or a dad or a friend who gets people to listen to me out of, they're afraid I'm going to yell at them, they're afraid I'm going to hit them, they're afraid I'm going to explain, that's abusive. I am a boss, and if my employees were afraid of me because they thought I was going to yell at them in our staff meeting, that's not okay. That is not an appropriate way, even if it quote unquote works, if they work harder because they're afraid of me. No, that's abusive. That's not the way to use power. It's not healthy psychologically. It's certainly not loving from a Christian standpoint. And you just do not see that modeled in the New Testament. We talk about loving one another. We talk about caring for each other. There isn't this like berate someone and make them afraid of you and then they'll follow you. You go, no, that's missing the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So this idea of, well, it does work. Well, it might get you what you're hoping for, but it's going to be temporary. It's not genuine, and it's certainly not biblical. And so to try to justify, I'm going to physically go after someone, I'm going to emotionally or psychologically abuse with my words or with stonewalling. Because anger, of course, as we know, can take many different forms.
Yeah.
And to say that those forms of, I would like to use the word, really they're forms of retribution. It's like I'm going at, or retaliation, I think is the word I was looking for. So it's a form of really retaliating. I'm gonna get this person back in this way. And usually someone's gonna pick a way where they know it's gonna land. It's gonna harm that person. So the desire is not typically solely to get the behavior that one wants. It can also be, I want them to feel it because I'm mad.
And I think there's a very base level for us when we're hurt. We want somebody else to hurt. We want them to feel like we feel. And I think that is a deep piece for all of us that, if you step on my toe, I want to stomp on your foot. And I think it's natural, but it's not how we want to be. It's not, certainly as humans or as Christians, how we want to live of, well, you wronged me, so I'm going to make you pay and I'm going to make you feel it and I'm going to make you suffer. Yes, on the one hand, I say it's a very natural response. On the other hand, I say, wow, I don't want to live like that at all. And if you're a follower of Christ, there's no way that you want to go around making people hurt because you hurt.
Right. Absolutely. And I've seen this played out as well with this idea of a bad temper being paralleled to Elijah in the Old Testament. Now, I've heard both. I've heard Elijah, the story of him, because he can be classified as kind of a doom and gloom prophet. I mean, he brought a lot of bad, hard news. So he shared a lot of tough stuff with people. Or the story of Elisha with the bears, where he was being given a hard time by these kids, teenagers. We're not sure how old they are, but 3 bears came out and ultimately killed these kids. So I've heard both of those stories. And now, to give a personal example, my dad was compared to this. So, and in some ways, it's like, I mean, he did some stuff, but was it God ordained? What was really more going on behind these stories, which I'll give a little bit more on that here. But my dad had a temper. He behaved in an abusive manner. And I was told that was how the Spirit of God was in him and upon him. And so that justified his behavior. So he needed to see that as how it needed to be. He needed to be that way. So there was no attempt at repentance or growth or any form of apology. So, which interestingly enough, towards the end of his life, I did get one, which would really contradict what I had been told my whole life. Yeah, because why would he, when he was dying and really laid on his back, so to speak, and looking back at his life and coming to terms with what might be the final moments of his life, why would he say something like that if he really truly believed it himself? So it really kind of undid some of what I had been taught right there in that moment.
You wouldn't. I mean, you make a really strong point. I mean, if I'm going to say, this is who I am, it's divinely ordained for me to be angry, then it doesn't make sense for me to then say, I'm sorry for being angry. If it was divinely ordained, then why am I sorry? It doesn't fit. Your bigger question, it's one I've heard as well, and it's one I struggle with. We can definitely talk theologically, and we can talk about the passages, and we can talk about biblical interpretation. But psychologically, it's a really hard thing to just say, well, yes, I'm angry, but it's just because I have the spirit of Elijah, and that's it. Because what it does is it limits any progress. It closes the door on moving forward, on improving anything. If I just say, yes, I have a temper, and I yell at people, and I hit people, and I'm abusive, but it's got the spirit of Elijah. With that comes sort of, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. That's it. And it is impossible to move forward and get better if I come with that stance. And I would say that's the case with any concern, any issue. I mean, I've had people use mental health as a rationalization to say, hey, I have bipolar disorder. Of course I hit my wife. I've got bipolar. What else am I going to do? And you go, hold on a second, hold on. Like, I acknowledge that you have bipolar disorder. I have empathy and compassion for that. But that doesn't give you a free ticket to just hit your wife and then pull out your bipolar card and say, nobody can be mad at me. Like, I have bipolar. That's just the way it is. No. Like, there's still accountability. There's still responsibility for your actions. And when you have this play of, I have the spirit of Elijah, I have bipolar, I have whatever else, it closes the door to accountability, and it closes the door to improvement. And so you literally get stuck at that point because you can't get better if that's your stance.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's an excuse. And oftentimes when people try to bring God in any form of the Trinity, Jesus, God the Son, God the Father, but most often I would say the Holy Spirit. Most often I hear it as the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is working in me or doing something or saying something. And even though it doesn't necessarily align with scripture, that's what's happening. And this is now my free ride, my get out of jail free card. I can do what I want.
Which is obviously a huge struggle, accountability wise, psychologically, and theologically. If you say the Holy Spirit is having me do things that are contrary to biblical teaching, just right there you go, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if I use that, hey, you can't be mad at me because, the Holy Spirit is leading me to do this. Again, it just breaks down any form of communication, any form of accountability, any form of progress. I mean, and this can be used I've seen this with pastors of large churches where they come in and, the Holy Spirit says, this is what we're going to do. And the whole elder board goes, well, let's talk about it. And they say, no, we're moving forward. This is it. That's all there is to it. The Holy Spirit. And you go, wait a second. I get your passion and I get your desire on whatever the thing is that we're talking about. But if we're just steamrolling people, pushing people down, there's no way that you look and say, yes, that's the biblical model of leadership, is just to come into a room and bully people. It doesn't fit. And it happens far too often.
It does. Yes. And I think it happens way more often than a lot of people realize it's happening. Again, anywhere on that spectrum, it's popping up all over the place. Unfortunately, people are starting to talk about it more because it's a significant problem. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to geek out for a minute.
Okay, go for it.
And I'm going to do this briefly because everyone who's listening, I want you to look into this a little bit yourselves. I know that this is happening with many of you. And so I want to provide a bit of a correction on the context of these two prophets. And again, so I'm going to keep this brief. Dr. Ballard, I promise not to bore you. But first, I want to talk about Elijah quickly. Elijah did not even actually have a temper. He was sharing the message of God as his prophet. So Elijah was not an angry man walking around wanting to give everybody a hard time. He was delivering a very difficult message to people who did not want to hear it. And this was actually wearing on him. So in 1 Kings 19, Elijah actually asked God to die, saying that it had all been enough for him and he didn't want to do it anymore. So this was not someone walking around with a temper. This was someone delivering a tough message. And then also briefly, Elisha with the bears. So in this story, Elisha was jeered, is the word people typically use. So he's being made fun of by some boys and they're telling him to get out of here. They're calling him Baldy. And he turns around, looks at them, and he called a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And it was, I guess, 2 bears that came out of the woods. Injured, it says mauled in this translation in the NIV. So I don't know if they were actually killed or just hurt, but 42 of the boys. Now, this sounds horrific. I want to read to you, though, the portion of the study Bible where it gives you a little bit more interpretation and context. So I'm going to read this small paragraph to you. Dr. Ballard, thank you. I appreciate you giving me this moment. Let me make sure I read you the right one. So again, he's being called Baldy, and we might think, oh, I'm being called Baldy. That's personal. Like if someone calls you fatty or something like that, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's rude. It's hurtful, but good heavens, get some self-esteem and move on. Don't call out bears, right? But this disrespect and rejection are symptomatic of the nation's despising of the Lord's covenant and his prophets. The presence of Bethel's idolatrous shrine, so there's a shrine that is worshiping a false god, may have motivated the boys' behavior, and if unanswered, their mocking could lead to greater conflict with God's prophets who lived in that area. So this is not as simple as, oh, this man was getting made fun of, he got really mad, and so he then called out bears to injure and or kill 42 of these boys. This was a symptom of a way bigger problem of worshiping false idols and worshiping false gods and making fun of and despising. So the word despise is strong. That's like intensely hating. So intense hatred of God's prophets and therefore of God himself. So this is what the bear situation was about. This is not a man who had a temper, who behaved irrationally in the moment and God gave him a high five for it. That's not what happened there. I wanted to give a little more context for those two, because again, I think many of you have heard one or both of these used inaccurately. I always recommend, I personally have an NIV and an ESV translation. You can choose one of many depending on what is easier for you to read, but always get the study Bible version so that you get those notes on the bottom. They'll give you more context for what you're looking at. I'm done. Thank you.
No, I think that's great. And I think it's another important point for correct biblical interpretation, because if you just pull a verse out without looking at the history, without looking at the context, you can make it mean something that it didn't mean at all.
Right.
And so thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So if people are using these, it's not even what's happening to begin with, let alone what we've already talked about, well, how do you actually act it out? I mean, this isn't even accurate from square one. So we can nip it right there. Dr. Ballard, if you're talking to someone who is struggling with his or her own anger, what first steps do you recommend that they take?
There's a lot. I think the simplest first step is just acknowledging that it's a problem. And I would say that's the case with just about any problem you have. If I were to say, well, my anger's not that bad, it's not as bad as this person's, or, it only happens every once in a while, or I justify it, or I say, well, I'm only mad because, my wife is critical and that's why any kind of that language is going to get in the way. And so the first step is to say, hey, this is a problem that I need to work on. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I work with some people who can't get there. Like week after week, if they'll say, well, sure, I got mad, but my kids made me mad. And I go, stop. Like you can't get better if that's your stance, because what'll happen is next week you'll come in and you'll say, well, I got mad again, but it's those drivers. And if I just say, well, what are you going to do? Bad drive. I mean, that will limit any progress you can. So there is this sense of, okay, my anger is out of control, or at least not where I want it to be. And I need to work on it. So that has to be your foundational first step. After you're there, you get to a place where, do you have an awareness and can you see when your anger is coming on? Some people don't figure out they're angry until they're blowing up and yelling and screaming and throwing things across the room. Well, that's not great, because people ask me all the time, what do I do when my anger is at a 9.9? And I said, there's not a great answer for you there. I mean, it's kind of too late. And so if you notice earlier in the day, hey, I'm feeling irritated, I'm feeling annoyed, I'm feeling frustrated. And you go, well, that's not anger. No, but it's a lower level. It's, you're at sort of a 2 or a 3 of I'm just sort of on edge. Pay attention to that. Have awareness of that. Because if you lack awareness, it's really hard to get better, again, at just about anything. But if I see, I'm short lately, that's a really key second step. And then your third step is to pull yourself and stop sooner than you think you need to. And this is where most people struggle, is they say, well, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And then it's really bad. And so kind of hitting that eject button earlier, where you say, all right, I'm starting to come off the rails a little bit. I need to step away. And if you're proactive about that, a lot of people wouldn't even know what's going on. I mean, I've had this happen many times where I'm in a meeting and I just need to sort of step out for a second and get a glass of water or something. And nobody has any clue that that's what's going on, because I know, hey, this is getting a little tense. This is getting a little bad. Let's do something now before it gets bigger, because anger naturally escalates. And if we know that that's a tendency as it's rolling downhill, getting faster and faster and faster. I don't want to wait. I want to head it off early and then get my wits about me and then go back in. And then that's the other piece, is you got to circle back to it. Don't just calm down and then forget it ever happened and sweep it under the rug. Yeah, but you want to circle back to it with logic and not just pure emotion.
What I love the most about what you just said is it gives people their sense of choice back. Instead of feeling like they're being controlled by their anger, they actually do have a choice. And like you said, there is some time in there of needing to learn what are my warning signs so I can tune into those and have that self-awareness and learn to catch them. But you can do that. And that's empowering.
And this happens every week in my office. Somebody will say, hey, I've been paying attention to this now. And all of a sudden I noticed my foot does this weird thing when or my hand, or my jaw does this, and my whole life I've never noticed that I did. And it's almost like that's your tell that you're about to get angry, and you've just been not paying attention to it your whole life. But once you start to pay attention, you go, oh, wait a second. I'm feeling a little heat on my cheeks. I'm not even furious, but it's starting to come. Now I do have a choice. Because probably no one in the room has any idea that, oh, my palms are a little off, something's a little, but I know. And once I know, then I can do something. Right.
And Dr. Ballard does have a book. When did it come out?
Yeah, it's been out a few years now. Yeah, I started it, I think it was 2011, and then it's been revised a few times.
It's great. And I'm going to link it in the show notes. It includes steps that you can follow in regards to your anger and learning how to back away from the ledge, so to speak. But it's interactive. So you really get to engage the material, answer questions, and it really gets you thinking again, because this awareness piece is crucial, or you won't be able to manage it better. And so, Dr. Ballard, I would love to land and end us on this last question. There are people out there who are listening who are on the receiving end of anger, that whether it's wrongly justified or not, it's called righteous and it's not, it's called the spirit of Elijah or Elisha and it's not. Wherever that lands, ultimately, they're not getting treated well. They're being harmed emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually. What steps do you recommend to someone who's listening right now who is on that receiving end of anger?
I mean, the first thing I would say is it breaks my heart to hear that. I know it's true, but it's horrible and it's sad. And there are so many people who are on the receiving end who do not deserve it. And so it's just, I have a lot of compassion for people who are in that place. The second thing I would say is once you've experienced this a lot, it can become very difficult to see it objectively and to really look at what's going on. And I've talked to many, many people who have been in abusive relationships for years who have essentially been brainwashed and they don't even recognize what's up and what's down. And so it can become really hard to make a call of, is this okay? Is this not okay? What they said to me, is that all right? Well, maybe I did deserve it because I did, and you start to play these games in your head where you can't really think clearly. I do think it's important to be able to have somebody you can confide in, somebody that you can talk to that's outside of the situation. And I know a lot of times people are fearful of doing that. If there's a wife whose husband is abusive, she doesn't want to tell anyone because of fear of what could happen or shame or all kinds of different emotions. But staying in that situation and not sharing someone can actually be more dangerous because you can learn that this is just normal, this is how it is, and then you stop questioning it, which puts you in a really dangerous spot. So I would say find somebody that you can talk to and try to find a place for you to be safe, that you can really make sense of what the right thing to do here. And even if you did something bad, even if you did, whatever wrong, does not mean the other person has the right to abuse you and take their anger out in a way. Even if the anger is quote unquote justified, the response does not mean it is justified. And that's an important piece.
Awesome. Wow. What an excellent conversation. I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I know I learned a lot from Dr. Ballard and Naomi, and I hope it was encouraging for you and really beneficial. We actually have a few minutes until Dr. Ballard can join us. So I actually want to take this time to give you all an update on the work that Naomi Wright Ministries is doing right now. We have a very exciting announcement that you'll actually be the first to hear publicly. We're excited to announce that we've officially begun the process of rebranding. We will no longer be Naomi Wright Ministries, name to be announced soon, but we're going to be changing a lot on the website, the fonts that we're using, the colors, etc. While this sounds like, oh, why would you do that? What's the deal? I will get into that. But wanting to just explain, we launched Naomi Wright Ministries leading with Naomi's story. This was something that we felt was really critical to just being obedient to sharing her bold narrative. That's why the ministry was named Naomi Wright Ministries, as she led with her bold narrative there. But after a year, which I can't believe it's been a whole year of work of serving those who are impacted by religious abuse, we've now really been able to move into the exciting, tangible work of being able to provide support and resources for people in this population that we're serving, people who have been impacted by religious abuse, who have the potential to be impacted, who are supporting someone who's been impacted. Someone like Beth. Before I share Beth's story, I want to recognize that we talked a lot about anger today. Dismantling the falsehood that abusive behavior can be justified by calling it righteous or spiritual or the spirit of Elisha or Elijah. After hearing from Dr. Ballard and Naomi, this makes so much sense why it's used this way and why it's not okay. Even if it wasn't clear before, hopefully and probably it's a lot more clear now that misusing anger is never acceptable. But can you imagine with me for 1 minute if a trait like generosity and compassion was viewed the same way, that those things could be misused, even viewed as bad, as sinful? This is Beth's story. While we've changed her name for confidentiality, Beth is a real person, a beautiful woman we've had the honor of connecting with through our mentoring services that Naomi Wright Ministries provides. However, her story is such that her natural heart for generosity, a sense of compassion, these things that most people would say are great, were actually seen as distasteful from the confines of her religiously abusive childhood. These traits, which brought her and so many other people joy, were actually squelched in order to appease the voices telling her to cut them off, cut off all connection with the outside world, outside her unhealthy church group. She internalized that her gifts were a sinful manifestation of ungodly inclinations. That became so confusing, heartbreaking, distressing to her as it would be to anyone. However, she found Naomi Wright Ministries with the support of people like you who are watching this right now, who are supporting this work. We were able to offer mentoring services to Beth. She experienced freedom. She saw that those traits that she'd been groomed to repress were not only wonderful qualities, but ones to be nurtured. This blew her mind. Her world opened up and she became full of possibilities in which she had the freedom to love and be loved. This revelation made a tangible difference in her life. A lightness was evident in her within just 1 hour of mentoring. 1 hour, you guys, 1 hour of mentoring services we were able to give Beth that changed her life. You guys, there are 40,000 cults in the United States alone, 40,000. Those 40,000 cults are intentionally manipulating people like Beth, cults that are damaging the hearts and minds of individuals like her, cults who are twisting gods for their personal gain, who are leaving countless people like Beth, people who are hurting and need help in their wake, just generation after generation of brokenness and damaged hearts and minds. But here's the hope, you guys. You can be the help that they need. So many people have escaped cults and are still hurting. They're in need of healing and restoration. And Naomi Wright Ministries is ready, excited, uniquely positioned to help people like that, people who are victims of religious abuse. But we need your help too. Giving Day is coming up on November 30th. I don't know if you know Thanksgiving and then giving season is here. We're really excited to ask for you to join us in this work. Would you consider donating to provide mentoring to people who need it most? I'm going to put a link to our website that you can give to if that's something you're led to do. Please click on that. Please check it out. This is what your gift is going to go towards. You're going to give people a chance, people like Beth, to talk with an expert in cult abuse, someone who really knows exactly what it's like to be in her shoes. This nuanced expertise is invaluable and is lacking out there. You can't find this anywhere. All right. So that's what your gift provides. Your gift also provides technology for secure, confidential mentoring sessions. And this isn't just for privacy, you guys. There are people who are exiting cults right now who literally can't even tell their family that what's happening and what they're going through. So the technology that we need for secure, confidential mentoring sessions is so important. We're also going to be providing educational resources to prevent victimization and re-victimization. People who may not have had a background in a cult but are going off to college and don't know the signs for an unhealthy religious group, or someone who has been involved in an unhealthy religious group and they think, oh, that was a one and done thing, right? No, re-victimization is real, and the educational resources we're providing online through our podcast, etc. These are all going to provide help to people to prevent them from being victimized again or victimized to begin with. Your gift also provides online presence so that anyone looking for services can actually find the help that they need. This is where the rebranding comes in. This is why this is so important. We've done a lot of research. We've consulted with people who really know what they're talking about, and they've given us some great advice as for how to actually be found. We can't help people if they can't find us. So we're going to be rebranding for that purpose so that people like Beth, people who've suffered religious abuse, who are exiting a cult, who are concerned about their teenagers going off to college and not knowing one healthy religious group from an unhealthy one, this is for them. So please join us this year in reclaiming losses by providing quality mentoring services to hurting people, giving them back their joy, their compassion, their generosity permanently, not just for this holiday season. So please check out that link to give to Naomi Wright Ministries towards this work. This is what your gift is going to do. And spread the word. And not only can we be, found online, but by you letting people know about us. So we are out there and we want to be found. So please share about this. We're so excited to have Dr. Michael Ballard join us. So thank you so much for watching today and listening, for considering giving on November 30th. And now Dr. Ballard is here with us. So welcome, Dr. Ballard. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Can you see me and hear me fine? Everything okay?
Very well. Yes, you've got a nice halo in the background, so I love that. That presence there.
Yes, that was the goal. So that's good.
Awesome. I love it. It's the Zoom world that we live in, right? There's always a dog in the background or a kid screaming, or you just have a halo. So it's what it is right now, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we just finished sharing the pre-recorded contents of your discussion with Naomi, and we're really excited to dive into some questions that people have after listening to this. So we're gonna dive into that and see if any other questions come up. Please, if you're watching now, feel free to jump in, share a question, and we're gonna get to it. So first of all, let's start with number one. We've had a couple come in outside of this, so let's dig into it. First of all, I love that you nerded out about what happens in the brain when people are angry and the frontal cortex and all that cool psychology stuff is really cool to hear that. So this question has to do with that. Is it fair to say that one must be using their frontal cortex, that link to the rational side, to have righteous anger, to care about justice, etc., that it's actually not possible to have rational or righteous anger without your frontal cortex being engaged? Is that a correct understanding, or can you elaborate about that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I like it because I hadn't heard that one before. Okay, so if we think about it, your righteous anger comes from something that is morally, ethically wrong. It's something that would go against what God would have. It's something that would be an evil to the world or an injustice. Do you have to have a righteous anger to come from the frontal cortex? My first reaction is yes, because if we're just looking more at our more primitive state, if we're looking more at just the midbrain, we can get very upset and angry about things as an instant reaction without having time to filter, to think through, well, is this actually righteous or is it not? Is this actually legitimate anger? Is this more my own personal thing? I can get really mad at something as my first instinct and then pause and think for a second and go, oh, wait a second. Like I'm getting mad over nothing. There's nothing that's actually there. I guess if I tried to make an exception to that, if I were to witness something right away that was wrong, I witnessed child abuse happening in the moment. I don't have to sit there and think and go, is this okay? Is this not okay? Let me wait. Like I can see that, and instantly I can have this sense of no, that's not okay. And so that might be a place where I would go, okay, in some situations that were clear, if I was clearly seeing something that was absolutely wrong, could I have that instant reaction? I could. My fear is most of the time it's not that clean. Most of the time it takes me more of a moment to consider where I'm coming from.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's really helpful. I think this next question kind of relates to that. And I think there's another one that might also be coming in that is similar, but kind of that idea of feeling angry and being able to still think through that. So are we supposed to only feel anger in private, and only once we've kind of calmed down to the point where we're not feeling angry anymore, that's when we get to have a conversation with someone about what made us angry? Or is there like a healthy way to express the emotion of anger in a conversation, like when you're in it, while still having our frontal cortex engaged?
That's a great question. And what I would say is we have to be aware of anger on a spectrum and not in a binary sense. And so is it okay to be angry and have a conversation? I would say yes, if we're at sort of the lower end of the conversation. If you have wronged me and I need to sit down with you, I don't need to be completely 100% calm about that, where I sit and I can have a firm conversation with you and say, hey, I'm really not okay with this. But I'm not being abusive, loud, angry, yelling. It's not that, but there's still some emotion. I don't want us to be absent of all emotion in having that conversation. So I do think that's the case. Do we have to be angry in private? No. But again, it's that place. Am I at a 2, 3, 4? If I'm at a 2, 3, 4, I can probably still have a conversation with you and relay like I'm not okay with this without it getting out of control. If I'm at a 6 or a 7 or an 8, having a conversation is not going to help. We're going to get nowhere, and it's going to cause more harm than good.
Wow. So that's a really interesting scale that you bring up. Can you talk about that a little bit? What is this 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Like, how do we know where we're at in that scale, or just like, what is that scale?
Yeah, it's really important because we often think of anger as all or nothing. And so we'll say something like, hey, you were angry about that. No, I wasn't. I wasn't. Yes, I was angry, or no, I wasn't angry. And usually the answer is, well, no, there's a whole degrees of anger. So for instance, if I'm at a 0, I might be sitting on a beach, relaxing, and there's no care in the world, and I'm totally content with everything. And if I'm at a 10, I might be like a wild animal, breaking things, throwing things, destroying things, punching holes in walls. I'm sort of destructive, if you could imagine that extreme. Well, there's all kinds of in between when we talk about anger. It's not either I'm on a beach or I'm punching a hole in the wall. And so if I'm at a 1, I get at a 1 multiple times per day, where it's sort of, oh, that's annoying that my computer's frozen. And it's 5 seconds and then it's gone. And that's no big deal, but it's, I don't like it. If I'm at a 2 or a 3, it might be something that I'm sort of irritated, I'm bothered by, but it's not that big of a deal. And people around me might not even know. They might not even see it or be aware of it. But I know I'm kind of a little tense, a little off, a little irritated, frustrated. Usually 5 is about the point where I'm raising my voice. And so if I'm starting to lose some sense of control. If I'm raising my voice, most of the time, if you had a video of me doing that, I'd look at it later and go, "Oh, like I don't like how I responded there. That wasn't the best side of me." If I'm at a 2 or 3, I might look at a video and go, "No, I handled that one fine." If I'm at a 7 or an 8, no way. I'm yelling, I'm getting argumentative, I'm getting defensive, I'm repeating myself, I'm changing the subject, I'm talking about things that are not even relevant to what's happening, I'm getting personal, I'm attacking you and not attacking whatever the situation is that I'm talking about. I'm getting a lot more in what we'd call the abusive territory of really tearing you down is oftentimes a 7-8. And then it can get physical, more of the 9 and 10, even just posturing. I'm getting big, I'm getting in your face, or I'm pushing, I'm hitting, any of those things as well.
That's super helpful. I think I was going to ask a follow-up question too, just how can we know where we're at, or how can we know when someone else is on that scale and where they're at? So I think giving some of those examples were really helpful. Is there anything else you'd add just for someone I'm thinking who's maybe looking at someone who they're thinking, are they getting angry? Where's the point where maybe I step away? Like, where do they get to that like 5 or 6 point? Like, besides the indicators that you mentioned, is there anything else helpful to kind of know about that for someone who's in that position?
It's a good question, both in yourself and in someone else, because if I know, I mean, I just talked to someone this morning who said he didn't figure out he was mad until it was too late. And so there's the sense of, if I'm more tuned into my internal cues and I can see, hey, I'm at a 3 or a 4, this is starting to pick up some speed and some steam. I probably need to change, like I need to stop or do something differently now, because it's naturally going to escalate. That's the way anger works. And so if I'm at a 3 or a 4, I should probably step away, change the subject, go to a different room, something in that sense. And oftentimes we do the opposite. We say, no, I just got to push through it. I got to push through it. And a lot of times, no, don't. You'll make it worse. If it's the other person, then you're in a situation where you go, okay, they seem like they're repeating themselves. They're changing the subject. This is becoming a personal attack. This is not about what we're talking about. And a lot of times you go, is this going to be productive? If we continue, because a lot of times when we're fighting, when we're mad, we reach a point of no return where nothing good comes after that. And so there is this sense of, oh, okay, we're in this place where this isn't going to lead to a resolution. If we stay in this, we're not going to say, hey, that's a good point. That's how we should work through. It's just going to be destructive. And once we're there, I don't tell the other person to leave, right? If you're really mad and you're at a 6 or 7, I'm not going to say, hey, you're mad, get out of here. That's just going to make the situation worse. I'm just going to remove myself at that point. And I'm going to say, I'm going to step away. And I won't say a lot. It's not going to be a long conversation. It's not going to be because you did X, Y, and Z, and because just I'm going to step away. And if I can do that successfully, great. If not, if I have to like literally get in my car and go away, like, okay, but I don't want to stay in a place where somebody's just attacking me.
Yeah, well, that's super helpful. I think that's our heart for some of this conversation too, is that people can recognize that that is a good boundary to have. And that is a boundary. And that's one that you have every right to enforce as needed. So thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. I think sometimes people on the other end say, don't walk away. We're not finished.
Yeah.
And there's a level, like if we're at an argument, it's a 2 and we're calm and I just don't like conflict and I leave, then I would say, well, no, don't do it. Like you should be able to have a tough conversation. But if somebody's attacking you and we're not getting anywhere, it's healthy to step out of that.
Absolutely. I think to add the spiritual component of it, I know that I've heard people kind of quote the Bible literally. There's a Psalm, I think it's Psalm 4 or Psalm 5, but it talks about like not letting the sun go down on your anger as like a reason why we have to talk right now. We can't step away. We have to do this. I've heard that used, but I don't have an MA in Christian studies or anything like that. But my understanding of that is that doesn't literally mean you have to get it all out before the sun sets at 5:32 p.m. but that you're not supposed to let it fester. You're not supposed to let time go by that's unnecessary for that to shift or change or become bigger than it is, that you're supposed to address it as soon as you can. Would you have any comment to that?
Yes, I think it's a balance on 2 fronts, because on the one hand, You do want to deal with your problems. You do want to deal with you don't want to shove it under the rug. You don't want to avoid it. You don't want to just push it to the side and let it bubble up and cause more problems tomorrow, the next day, the day after that. Completely agree. Like, let's keep short accounts. Let's deal with our problems. Let's make that happen. And at the same time, sometimes when anger is too hot, you're not going to deal with it like you're not. I mean, you can sit there and it's 2 a.m. and you can say, we're not going to bed until we figure this out, and we're screaming and yelling at each other, and you go, this isn't going to work. Now, I get the idea, don't let the sun go down in your anger. Yes, yes, yes. And at the same time, don't put yourself in a position where we're just going to fight for hours and hours and make it worse. Because what usually happens in those scenarios is somebody just gets exhausted. And we're screaming and it's late, and the person says, fine, you win. I don't even care what we're arguing about anymore. We're done. But that's not a resolution to an argument. And it's also not sustainable, because then the next day or 2 days later, you're going to come back because you didn't actually fix the problem. One person just got worn out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. And I know that there's actually a lot of verses in scripture that do talk about anger and about those same concepts of don't let it control you, and when you're tired, it's hard to control yourself and deal with it, but do it in such a way that actually resolves it and doesn't make it worse.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah. So some people can obviously go in the direction of thinking that even feeling angry is sinful. So we've talked about anger not necessarily being bad. That even happens all the time, right? I'm at 1 or 2, because my computer crashed or something. But if some people are thinking about that even feeling angry is sinful, what do you have to say about that?
Sure. And this one's pretty clear biblically. We know, in your anger, do not sin. And so it doesn't say, if you're angry, you are sinning. It says, in your anger, do not sin. So I say to people all the time, being angry is not actually the problem. The problem is what you do with the anger. If I'm angry about something, I can be angry without being sinful, even if it's selfish anger. Even if I'm mad that somebody didn't ask me to lunch, and there's no big righteousness that was wronged here in the world. I've just been slighted. I can be mad about that and then just think through my head and process it without sending a mean text or gossiping about the person or doing something angry back to the person. I can be upset in a small way, right? In a controlled environment where I go, that did hurt my feelings. I am mad that I got left out from lunch. Usually if we're in that place of the anger, it's not long lasting. It's not intense. It's a short piece of, yeah, that did hurt. What should I do about it? Well, I should, maybe have a conversation with the person, but not in anger. So the idea of being angry, I don't have a problem with that. We can even look at little children before they can speak, experience anger. And it can be for the smallest thing in the world of, you gave me my milk in a blue cup and I wanted it in a red cup. And I'm mad and I knock it over. Am I going to say that child's sinful? Well, no, the emotion is, I'm unhappy with what this is. Okay. Now, if you're doing destructive things, then you go, okay, that behavior. So this may sound silly, but do I get upset at the kid for preferring a color cup? No, but knocking over the cup, you go, okay, that's the behavior that we go, now we're crossing the line. And I'm not going to say, great, feel free to do that all day long. Hope that clarifies some.
Yeah, thank you. Here's an interesting one. Speaking of scripture, what about God's wrath and me being made in his image?
I think, I love this one. There is an importance to understanding God's wrath, because theologically, if there is no wrath, then it changes our view of sin. It changes our view of grace. It changes our view of redemption. And so if there's a sense where our God's not bad because our sin's not that bad, then if I take that logically, there's actually not really that much need for a savior at all. There's not that much need for Jesus because, my sin's not that bad. And so the idea that no, there is a standard here that is really high, and that is God's perfection. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That is very clear. And so the standards here, is there wrath that comes from that? Yes. And we can see that biblically all over the place. God hates sin. There's no mixing around with that. And so if we're made in God's image, there should be a piece of us that says, hey, when there's sin, when there's wrong, when there's things in the world that aren't meeting God's standard, it should trigger something in me as well. So if God is angry about the oppression of the weak, I should be angry about the oppression of the weak. It should, if I'm made in his image, I should have a similar understanding of that in that way. If he's upset about how we're not caring for, the fatherless and the widow, then I should be upset when I see that same thing happening. Now, and to tie that with my earlier conversation, that doesn't mean I go, burn somebody's house down because I'm upset about it. It just means, okay, no, this causes me anger. So what do I do? How am I productive with that anger to do something that's going to help and not make things worse?
Yeah, that's great. So this is an interesting added layer to it. We've got a question in from someone who was previously part of a cult. So he says now he's has been out of the cult for many years now. I wasn't as angry as I could have been at my former cult leader. I had Christ's love for him. I'm told by other people, I'm not angry at Satan as I should be when he attacks. Am I not feeling God's anger the way I should?
Yes. Yeah, that's a deep one, because there's a level to which sometimes we need to feel anger for things that are wrong. And sometimes what happens is we don't allow ourselves to feel anger for some things for a number of reasons. It could be any sort of reasons, but we sort of say, no, I shouldn't be angry about that. And so I don't allow myself to go there when actually it's valid. And then the anger comes out over here in a sideways direction instead. And so if you're a part of something that is wrong, there's an injustice, there's something that is hurtful, that goes against what God would have, should there be anger towards that? Yes. I mean, yes, because again, it's the wrath of God against the things that are against God. And so if someone is deliberately hurting you, if someone is manipulating a situation, if someone is being cruel, hurtful, abusive, should we get angry about that? I mean, the best example I can think of is a woman I worked with years ago who was being physically abused, and she was not mad at her husband for physically abusing her, because she would say, well, he has a hard life. Things are tough. And so I shouldn't be mad about that. But then she would get mad at her kids and take out the anger sideways. And you go, no, like, this is when you should get mad about, is it's not okay to be physically abused. And so I hope that answers, it's a complex question, but I hope it gives some light to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ballard. Yeah, definitely. It's every situation so personal and unique. It's hard not to know more details there, but yeah, I hope that is a helpful response. So there's someone who's asking, and this kind of ties into kind of what you talked about earlier. Sometimes I don't realize that I'm getting, and actually I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. So hopefully I understand the question here, but sometimes I don't realize that I'm getting angry until someone else accuses me of being angry. Then that accusation actually makes me lose it and I start yelling. Was I already angry like under the surface, or maybe that's just a trigger for me? Like, how do I handle that?
It's a good question because it depends, right? Mm-hmm. It could be that you were angry and you didn't see it. You weren't aware of yourself. I think a lot of times we may not see our own cues as well as somebody else might see them in us. And so I might be angry and someone says, hey, you're angry. And I go, No, I don't think so. When if I had a video and I could watch later, I would go, oh, I actually was angry at the time. I just didn't see it in the moment. We're not always the best judge of ourselves. We don't do a great job of that all the time. So that could be it. Alternatively, it could be that I really wasn't, that I'm totally fine. And somebody says, hey, why are you so angry? And then that accusation causes the anger, because then it feels like, well, hold on, I'm getting attacked here. I didn't do anything wrong. And so what I'd like to say is, if you're in a very good, healthy place and I'm not angry, and somebody says to me, why are you angry? I wouldn't respond in anger. I would respond in curiosity of more, you think I'm angry right now? Because I don't think I'm angry right now. So like, what makes you think I'm angry? Well, the way you're sitting in that chair makes, okay. And not just dismissing it, not saying, no, I'm not, yes, you are, right? It's more of a curiosity place. If I'm in a not great place, though, I will take it defensively, right? And you'll say, why are you angry? And I'll say, I'm not angry. Why are you saying I'm angry? You're making me angry by saying that I'm angry. And so to pull that back a little bit and go, all right, I need to look at myself either before or during, because odds are there was probably something the person saw, even if it was very minor, to say you're getting angry. And then as a defensive posture, we felt harmed, we felt attacked, which may be real or may not, may just be perceived. Like I could perceive that you're attacking me in the way you ask a question when you're really not, because I'm defensive in that place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine it could also be very frustrating to be told how you're feeling.
Yes.
If, for someone else to sort of violate that, in a sense of like saying that you're this way, and if that's not true, that can cause frustration and anger there. And I think it can also probably be disorienting too, to be told you're a certain way, especially if it's not true, because then you start to question everything.
It's absolutely true. It's a great point. And it's happened to me as well. Even clinically, someone will come in and say, it's really hard that the last session you were mad at me. And a lot of times I'm sort of confused in that moment of, I don't even know what we're talking about. And so then it's more of a curiosity of, okay, what did I say in the last session? What happened that you walked away saying I was angry? Oh, well, you said this. And so I thought and then you kind of have to put the pieces together, because it's disorienting and confusing, and it can be emotional, because then you can go, wait a second, I'm not mad at you.
Yeah.
But then that's invalidating to them.
Yeah.
And so it throws everything off.
Yeah. I appreciate the response of curiosity when someone kind of makes a statement, and that your response can be, instead of defensive, to be curious. But what would you say to someone if they try being curious and asking more information, and that person doesn't respond well? Maybe they aren't answering, maybe they're getting defensive, or so obviously it depends on the situation. But if someone is maybe really harping on like you're angry and don't really have good reasons, or maybe they're getting angry, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is if somebody else is getting heated up in that kind of place, I just want to slow everything down a little bit, of help me understand. And then they're, don't try to do this, don't ask me questions. You are angry. You're not admitting it. And then I'm back to the point where I go, now this conversation may not be going very far. If this person's getting heated, if they're steaming up, I might go, okay, it seems like you're really upset about this. Can you help me understand? Because I want to get what we're talking about, and right now I'm just confused. Yeah. And not a defensive posture, not I'm going to yell back at you, nothing like that.
Yeah, definitely. So someone made a comment about the comment in the pre-recorded session. I think the example that you had used about a kid being hit by the teacher and the parent approaching the teacher using the Matthew 18 model. At that point, don't you just, go to the police, or like, what are some, maybe, I'm not sure what the question is there exactly, but it sounds like there's probably some things that you don't necessarily do the Matthew 18 model, but maybe take some more steps towards that.
Absolutely. There are times absolutely where that's the right response. And I appreciate that. That's valid.
Awesome. Well, we've had a really great discussion today, and I know that we've mentioned a couple times your book that you wrote. Can you tell us a little bit about that book, as far as who should read that book? How is it set up, and like who are the right audience that you want that book to be distributed to? If someone's going to interested in learning more or diving deeper, what are the kind of people that would really benefit from your book?
I think there's sort of two people. One, you have somebody who themselves saying, I'm not doing great with my personal anger. And to be fair, anger has many faces. So it may not be explosive anger, but it may just be, I've got seething bitterness, or I'm passive aggressive towards people, or I close them off and I stonewall, but it's all different faces of my anger. I'm struggling with my anger, and I know it's causing a problem in my relationships, in my family, in my work, in my community. There's something, it's causing an issue, and I need to do some work on this. That's one where I would say, great. It's something you can look at. It's a lot of times with emotions, they feel confusing. And so it's meant to be very much a step-by-step, a logical, okay, do this and then do this and then do this. And you can learn it from that perspective. Instead of like, let's just talk about our feelings all day and they just sort of get stirred around. And it's here's steps that you can actually do. So you have that person. The other person is, if you know someone in your life that is really angry, I wouldn't get it as sort of a manipulative tool to say, I'll buy this for them and, leave it on their nightstand or something, or, I'll learn all the tricks of what, no. But I would say this is something you can understand, because I have had people say a lot of times to me, I'm not an angry person and I just don't get it. I don't get why my husband's so angry and blows up, and it doesn't make sense to me. And you go, okay, this can be something that you read and say, all right, that's what's going on here. That's what's happening. Not in a sense, to be clear, that it's your job to fix your husband's anger, because I don't believe that. But rather as a sense of, I just want to understand. In the same way, if you were married to somebody who, had cancer, you might say, well, I want to learn about cancer. It's not my job to fix the cancer, but I want to understand what they're going through. I want to make a little more sense of it. That would be a really good, helpful tool.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to add the title in our chat here so that anybody who's interested in that can Google that, can check it out. I know it's on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, probably other bookstores, etc. So definitely check that out. For someone who's interested in that book, that they just heard you talk about it and like, yes, that applies. What are they supposed to do it with a group, or how does that work? Are there groups using it that they can get in touch with, or is it really like an individual study?
There are a lot of clinicians who have adopted it, where they will sort of say, this is what I use with my anger management groups or with my anger management patients. And so it's something that many counselors do use, many therapists do use. If you know a counselor, if you're seeing a counselor, I don't know, obviously, if they would be using it or not. They might be. You could certainly bring it up and say, hey, I heard about this book. Do you know about it? Are you okay if we do it together, if we read it? Because it does help a lot of times to say, all right, I'll read chapter 1, and this week we'll talk about chapter 1 together, because then we have some foundation. A lot of times people will do it with a friend. You can do it with your spouse. The one thing I would always say is you want it to move forward. You want it to be helpful. You don't want to read the chapter and say, this is new stuff for us to fight about, right? Like, oh, you do this and you do this wrong, and that's not the point. It's let me understand it better. And then there are individuals who just say, I just choose, I don't want to go to a counselor. I don't want to go to a group. I want to just on my own do it. And there's a lot of people who have gotten benefit of it that way too.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Dr. Ballard. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and asked so many great questions. Dr. Ballard, is there any final comment that you want to leave with after this discussion?
Yeah, I think anger is a very difficult emotion. It's a tricky emotion. I think it's something that is very confusing. And for most of us, we didn't learn how to deal with it growing up. And if we learned anything, it was probably from a bad model that we saw from our parents. And so it's very hard to to really get a handhold on. But I would say once you can, it has an amazing trickle-down effect, where if I grow in my ability to control my anger, not only am I doing better in my anger, but then my relationships get better. My marriage often gets better. My relationships with my kids get better. A lot of times we see improvement in anxiety and depression and other symptoms because now my anger is under control. And so that would be my hope for everyone, is not just that your anger gets better, but that it really makes a benefit for your whole life.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Ballard. So grateful that you took the time to be with us today. I definitely believe that this content is going to be so helpful for our listeners and watchers, which we hope you got a lot out of it. And we're excited about our next live stream, which is going to be in December. So for those of you just tuning in, we will be hosting that on Monday, December 13th at 12 p.m. And our special guest will be Mary Ellen Mann, LCSW, on the topic of triggers. What is a trigger and how can I help myself? That save the date will be coming out soon. So mark your calendars in the meantime for December 13th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. We hope to see you there. Thank you again so much, Dr. Ballard, and you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye.